Right. What you got, Miss Desiree?
Okay, so we have a session today at 3 in MH 30248. On Friday, I'm probably going to end up canceling both the session and my office hour just because I won't be here and I won't be able to make it up. Yeah, but if you have any questions, email me and then I'll answer you before Friday, okay? Thank you.
All right, very good. Let's see, exam 3 is a week from Friday, correct? All right, today we are going to continue our look at the New Deal. Answer this to get us started, please. Okay, what do you say? Aquaman is far, or excuse me, Thor is far cooler. Is, is, is Thor really just that cool, or does Aquaman suck that bad? Okay. Last time we left off describing these confusing and desperate times of the Great Depression, getting Franklin Roosevelt elected. Let's take a minute and bust some of the myths of the New Deal. Remember, it was controversial then, it's still controversial today. And anything that's controversial, well, misinformation can spread. And that misinformation, if repeated often enough, will frequently turn into a myth. So there's a couple of them that we need to bust right off the bat. The first myth, number one myth, is that the New Deal ended the Depression. This is a widely believed myth. Let me state for you categorically, without question, it did not. If you want to thank somebody for ending the Great Depression, thank Hitler and the Japanese for starting World War II. Because that's what got us out of the Great Depression. Now, what the New Deal did is it put a floor under the Depression. It stopped the collapse from getting any worse. And over the period of the next several years, things start to slowly improve. But remember, it's not until the late 1942 that we get back to the pre-Depression levels of prosperity and pre-Depression levels of unemployment. As late as 1939, unemployment is still at 14%. So it cut unemployment in half, and industrial production is on the rise, but it did not solve the full problem. Myth number two, that Franklin Roosevelt was some kind of modern day Robin Hood. That he took from the rich and he gave to the poor. My grandfather, the wheat farmer out in western Kansas, believed this one. Franklin Roosevelt was on the side of the little guy and was trying to help the ordinary American. Grandpa really liked Roosevelt. Hated Hoover in particular, Republicans in general, loved Roosevelt. Out in his workshop above his workbench, he had a picture of Jesus, and right next to that was a picture of Franklin Roosevelt. And in Grandpa's eyes, the two were almost equal, Jesus having a slight advantage. And that's typical of what people in his generation thought. The reality is, though, that many of the poorest of the poor don't get any help from the New Deal. There is going to be some income redistribution through taxes. The wealthiest 5% of Americans by 1939 still control 25% of the nation's wealth. So it really takes them down back to the pre-1920 level. So there's going to be some income redistribution, but not to a great degree. Not that sets us apart from any pre-existing income inequalities that we had before the Depression. Myth number 3. The New Deal introduced creeping socialism. Now, this is problematic for a couple of reasons. One, because it's controversial, this is going to depend on your personal political point of view. The other problem here is the slippery slope argument that's been popular. That if we do one thing, that will inevitably lead to another, which leads to another, and pretty soon we're sliding down the mountain and we can't stop. We have already introduced pieces of socialism during the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era. At the local level, the cities own their own water companies or their own electric companies. And so we've already got this. The New Deal didn't start this. The second problem is a misdefinition of socialism. Socialism doesn't mean strong government. Socialism means that the government owns and operates the major means of production. The banks, the factories, the railroads. Private property is still allowed. You still own your own business. You own your own house. But the major means of production are owned and controlled by the government. That really didn't happen here. With one exception, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the government does not take control of the American economy. The government doesn't start to plan economic growth. So this is, again, a myth that didn't start with the New Deal and doesn't really meet the definition of socialism. Now, we've got a couple of things that we kind of want to talk about here for a little bit. First off, I want you to know that most of these New Deal programs, those that are listed in your crib sheet, get them out, start using them today to take some notes on. But most of these programs were not specifically Roosevelt's idea. Instead, he relied on a group that he referred to as the Brains Trust. He had a monopoly on the best brains. And so he'd call in people from business, from agriculture, from industry, from science, from academia. Bring them into the same room, say, here's the problem I want a solution to. Let's discuss it. And people would start throwing out ideas, and at some point Roosevelt would say, hey, I like that idea. We'll try that. Again, remember, no master plan here. And Roosevelt didn't create most of this himself. The other problem that we have here is this concept of how do we understand the New Deal? The traditional way, and the way that Hansen tries to present it to you in the textbook, is that we go from a first New Deal to a second New Deal. That the first New Deal lasted from 1933 to 1934, and then all of a sudden it was completely trashed, and Roosevelt takes this abrupt shift to the left, and the second New Deal is completely different and runs from 1935 through 1938. I have real chronological problems with that model. I understand what they're talking about. That Roosevelt does look more at reform and relief during the latter part of the New Deal than he did during the earlier part, and he does support more government activity, but it's not fundamentally different. Instead, I think the best model is to use what we refer to as the 3 R's. Recovery, relief, and reform. Recovery, relief, reform. That's how your New Deal crib sheet is organized. Everything that the New Deal does addresses or falls into one of those 3 categories. And some of them start early and run late. Some of them start a little bit later. This model puts things more in a chronological order, organizes things by what the program is intended to do. The first of the 3 R's are the recovery programs. The recovery programs are designed to address the supply side of the supply-demand equation. A lot of Roosevelt's advisors are telling him the problem is overproduction. There's too much product on the market and people simply aren't buying this stuff. So we're going to come up with some minimalist ways to try to get the economy to recover as quickly as possible. This is what we refer to as the quick fix approach. These recovery programs are designed primarily to stimulate the natural growth of a recovering economy with as little government intervention as necessary. Get this turned around as quickly as possible by doing as little as we can. Now, Roosevelt's first problem here is when he takes office in March of 33 are bank failures. So the bank holiday will be the first action of the New Deal. Bank failures are this huge problem. Between October of 29 and March of 33, when Roosevelt takes office, over 5,000 banks had gone out of business and taken their customers' money with them. And so the financial sector is in a deep crisis. People don't trust banks. People will not put their money in banks because they're afraid that the bank will lose their money. Bankers are the most hated group of people in America in 1933. So the bank holiday designed to turn this around. By executive order, Roosevelt orders all banks to close for a period of 4 to 5 days. Inspectors from the Treasury Department will come and look at the bank's books, their balance sheets. If the bank is healthy, it's got enough money in reserve to meet its depositors' demands, it will be allowed to reopen. If it's on the borderline, it'll receive a shot of cash from the Federal Reserve, it will be allowed to reopen. If the balance sheet, though, shows that this bank cannot recover, cannot meet, and has no hope of meeting its depositors' demands, it will be closed permanently. Roosevelt then goes on the radio in the first of his fireside chats. His weekly addresses to the American people. The fireside chat and radio is Roosevelt's version of Twitter. It's how he communicates with the American public. So he goes on the first of his fireside chats, and he tells the American people in that calm, reassuring voice that he had, that if their bank opens on Monday, they've got nothing to worry about. He guarantees it. The following Monday, when the banks reopened, more people deposited money in banks than withdrew money. What does that tell you? Don't mumble, little. God, I can't hear you up here. If you're going to say it, say it. What? It restored confidence, didn't it? People are not going to put money in a bank if they think it's going to get lost. But just Roosevelt saying, I promise you, your bank is safe. Your money is still there. Encouraged people to start trusting the banking system again. Now, we got a long way to go, and it's still in some pretty bad shape. But with as little action as necessary, Roosevelt was able to head off this immediate crisis. Now, at this point, Roosevelt probably had enough political support to nationalize the banks. What do we mean by nationalizing an industry? The government takes over the ownership. In other words, the S word, socialism. Roosevelt probably had enough political support to nationalize the banks. Remember, people hated banks. That he probably could have gotten away with it, but he didn't. He chose to leave capital in private hands. This is very pro-business. This is very conservative. The next problem that Roosevelt has to deal with is industrial recovery, which will be based on the NRA, the National Recovery Administration. Basically, the NRA suspended antitrust laws and allowed businessmen to write the rules that regulate them. Now, this is not an entirely new idea. The NRA is based on this concept of pools cartels. Remember, businessmen had tried this in the 19th century, and that method didn't work. The NRA encourages businesses to get together within their industry and draw up what are called codes of fair competition. In other words, rules that these businesses will operate under. And these businesses, under the NRA codes, are allowed to set minimum prices. They're allowed to set maximum production levels. For instance, let's say the tire industry. You get Goodyear and Goodrich and Pirelli and Michelin and Yokohama. You get them all together here, and they all agree nobody will make more than 1 million tires a year. That will limit supply. And nobody will sell a tire for less than $25. That's price fixing. Now, it didn't work before in the 19th century when businessmen tried this earlier. What makes anybody think it's going to work now? Now, if your company joins the NRA, the government will take you to court if you break the agreement. There's now an enforcement mechanism. So if Yokohama decides to drop the price of tires to $20 so they can sell more tires, the government will sue them for violation of the NRA codes. Basically, then, suspending antitrust laws. There's another important piece of the NRA known as Section 7A. Section 7A allows workers to join a union. If your company signs on to your industry's NRA code, you must allow your workers to join a union if they want to. So Section 7A, here in 1933, is the first action on the part of the federal government to support organized labor. And so this is kind of new. This is kind of groundbreaking here. The other sector that's in some really bad shape, of course, is agriculture, which has been in a depression since 1920. So industrial recovery will be based on the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Agency. Again, starts in 1933. Basically, what the AAA does, it pays farmers not to grow stuff. The farmers are saying our prices are so low because we can overproduce. So we need to cut production. But if we cut production, then we're going to lose money. So the AAA says, okay, you, the individual farmer, will go down to your county courthouse and you'll sign a contract with the AAA in which you promise to cut your production by 50%. If you normally raise 1,000 head of cattle, you promise this year that you're only going to raise 500. If you normally plant 1,000 acres of wheat, this year you promise you'll only plant 500 acres. That'll take product off the market. Hopefully food prices will go up. But then maybe not enough to compensate for what you took out of production. So the government will pay you a cash subsidy for the money that you have lost by taking this land out of production. So farmers essentially get paid not to grow things. Farmers love this. This is something that they've been looking for since the populist era. Some type of guarantee that their farm prices, their food prices, will continually go up. Now, the AAA kind of worked. With all of these, we've got some mixed results, though. The bank holiday was a success, was at least a short-term success. The NRA was pretty much of a complete failure. First off, the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional in 1935. And by 1935, big businessmen have come to realize that the NRA and fixing prices and maximum production levels doesn't really help them at all. And so when this thing is declared unconstitutional, business is glad that it's gone. Workers are sad because when the NRA is declared unconstitutional, it takes Section 7A with it. Hold on to that thought. We'll come back to that later. The AAA succeeded in raising farm prices, and when we say farm prices, we mean the price of food, but not significantly enough. Plus, there was massive opportunity for fraud in this program. You could sign the contract saying you're going to cut your production by 50%, you get the cash subsidy, and you go ahead and produce what you normally would anyhow. You could cheat. And there were so few inspectors, it was likely you wouldn't get caught. The AAA helps larger farmers more than small farmers. The more land you can afford to take out of production, the bigger your subsidy. If you only have 40 acres, you can't take 20 acres out of production and expect to survive even with the subsidy because the subsidy is so small. So the big guys get help, the little guys not so much. The AAA pays the subsidies to to the land owner, not necessarily the person who works the land. For instance, sharecroppers or people who rent land. They get kicked off the land, they're now unemployed and homeless, and the subsidy goes to the guy that owned the land. So there's still some inequities here. But they're all minimalist, they're all pro-business, they're all more on that conservative side of things to try. So let me ask you this here real quick. The underlying idea of the recovery programs, the basic principle that we're looking for here, the underlying idea or premise of the recovery programs was which of the following? Okay, let's see what you say. Results say the correct answer is B. Very good. To stimulate recovery with as little government intervention as possible, the quick fix. So now let's move on to the second R, relief. Getting America back to work. The recovery programs and agencies directed at the supply side, these relief programs are directed at the demand side. The underlying principle here was to provide direct temporary relief. Underlined temporary. None of these programs were ever intended to be permanent. They would exist only as long as the need for it was there, and then they were to be disbanded. And this is a new function for the federal government. The cities have done this kind of stuff before, the states have done this kind of stuff before, but now for the first time, the federal government will be directly involved in trying to provide some type of temporary relief. Now, keep in mind that this is not welfare like we understand it today. Roosevelt then, and most Americans then, as well as most Americans today, hate the idea of somebody getting something for doing nothing. So Roosevelt, like most people then and now, think that if somebody, the government for example, just gives you money, that's going to destroy your will to work. That's going to destroy your good character. So the goal here, the way that the government is going to achieve this goal is by trying to create jobs. This is what we would call workfare, perhaps. Put money in people's pockets. Try to stimulate consumption. Now, this is also known as Keynesian theory. When you take your economics class, you'll run into this. John Maynard Keynes was a British economist, came up with this theory. It's also called pump priming. He said that in a recession or depression, the government should spend money. So this is fiscal policy. The government should spend money to stimulate the economy, even if that means going into debt or deficit spending. The government spends more than it collects in taxes. And in the 30s, this was considered a very radical idea. National governments, especially the U.S., should never spend more than it collects in tax revenue. You simply did not unbalance the budget. And even Roosevelt thought that. But he was willing to use deficit spending, or Keynesian theory, when it was necessary, when he thought that this was the only way he could accomplish some other type of goal. So he was very hesitant to use this, but he did. Most of these jobs are going to be public works projects. The government will create jobs and fund them directly if necessary. The preferred method for these relief programs is to subsidize private payrolls. In other words, a construction company offers a bid to build a new parking garage at UTSA. But it can't hire the workers because it doesn't have enough cash to pay the workers. So, because this is a worthy project, the federal government will step in and pay the workers through the company. They'll subsidize the company's payroll. So you're not actually working for the government, you're working for a private company who's being funded by the government. So it's both direct and indirect at times here. And the last piece of this is if you want to get the benefit, you must work. These are not handouts. Now there's going to be several of them here that are important. One is known as the Civilian Conservation Corporation, or the CCC. And this one is going to be targeted at a specific group of people, specifically young single men from northeastern and midwestern industrial cities. Places where unemployment, like Chicago or Toledo, is far, far above the national average. And it's going to be run kind of like the military. It's going to be something that you young guys will volunteer for. You'll go down to the local CCC office and you'll enlist. And the CCC agent will give you a train ticket and say, show up at this train station at this time on this day. And so at that time on that day, you show up at the train station along with maybe a couple hundred other guys from your city who've signed on that week. They'll put you on the train, take you out someplace in the west like Wyoming or Montana, West Texas perhaps, and put you to work doing conservation jobs, soil conservation, water conservation, planting trees, rebuilding national parks, a variety of different healthy outdoor activities. Now, this is going to be pretty strict discipline. You'll live in a barracks with 30 other guys. You'll wear a uniform. You'll be led by a retired Marine drill sergeant. Lights off at sunset. Wake up is way before the sun comes up. In return, you are paid $30 a month. However, you only get to keep $5. The other 25 sent home to your family. Why is this? Well, Jesus, for example, signs on with the CCC, gets a job, earns a paycheck. He's the only one in his family right now that's got a job. Mom and dad have been unemployed for a couple of years. His little brothers and sisters are starving and don't have shoes. They're all about to get kicked out of their home. Jesus, you're the only one lucky enough to have a job. It's time for you to adult, to stand up and take care of your family. There's also a little bit of paternalism here. Jesus only gets to keep $5 because when he gets a weekend pass to go into town, he only has $5 to spend. If we let him have that whole $30, he'd go into town on a weekend and spend the entire paycheck in one weekend on booze and hookers. Not the industries we're trying to stimulate, pun intended. The CCC was wildly popular. It started in 1933. It's not disbanded until 1942. And most of the guys working for the CCC go from the CCC straight into the military. Again, mostly young single men. There are CCC camps for women. There are some for blacks, even though it's majority for whites. But it's a very popular program that does real important things. Another program here to create jobs was known as the Civil Works Administration, or the CWA. This was created in 1933. Actually, it was part of the NRA. And again, it targets a specific group of people, this time unskilled urban laborers. The first guys to get fired, the last guys to get hired, the guys that don't have any real skills, that earn the lowest wages. Kind of works like this. All of you guys are unemployed, and every day you go downtown to the corner of St. Mary's and Commerce Streets, where you're hanging out, hoping to find some day work, hoping that somebody will come by and say, hey, I need my lawn mowed. Do you want a day's work? Yeah, I'll take that. I'll do that. My house needs to be painted. Yeah, I'll do that. I mean, you're desperate for any type of work here. So, the CWA guy comes to the corner of St. Mary's and Commerce, where you're all at, and says, okay, show of hands, how many of you want half a day's work? No, seriously, you guys are unemployed. You're hungry. Who here wants a half a day's work? Raise your hand. Those of you that didn't bother to raise your hand, screw you. All right, you guys here, come with me. Sorry. Come with me. I take you down to Travis Park. I give each one of you a rake and say your job this morning is to rake up all the leaves into several big piles. At noon, you're done. You come back, you give me the rake. I hand you $5. You're done for the day. Now you can go buy some groceries, pay the rent maybe. Afternoon, I come back down to the corner of St. Mary's and Commerce Street. Says, who here still wants half a day's work? Raise your hand. Okay, if you didn't raise your hand, screw you. You don't get anything. Come with me. I take you down to Travis Park. I give each one of you a rake, and I say, your job this afternoon is take these big piles of leaves, spread them all back out. 5 o'clock, you come back to me, you hand me the rake, I give you $5, you're done for the day. What did that just accomplish?
Nothing.
What did that just accomplish?
Being able to get paid by actually doing something that is...
You earned money and you had to work for it. Wouldn't it have been easier for the CWA guy and everybody else to say, hey, who wants $5? Just pass out money. But then that'd destroy your will to work. You wouldn't look for work. You just wait for somebody from the government to start handing you money. There's another one here, probably the most important of all of these New Deal works programs, called the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. Now, we don't have enough time really to finish this. We really don't have enough time to get it started. So let's leave it here. We will resume on Friday. I will see you then.